Real quick, can I interrupt?
Now I want to, yeah, of course.
Okay, so the Hamas are sending rockets to Israel.
Yes.
And has Israel, like, first off, I don't know why, if it seems like they've reached an understanding, I'll stay on this side of the border, you stay on that side of the border. I don't understand why the Hamas are still sending rockets. And then B, why is it, or is it the case that Israel has only defended itself and not responded to those rockets?
No, they have responded
Sure, I figured.
periodically to the rockets,
Okay.
and this is where we get into a little bit of a controversy, right?
Mhm.
So, a lot of people will say to Israel, now keep in mind, so some context. Gaza is a relatively small piece of strip of land called the Gaza Strip.
Mhm.
There's 2 million people there. It's one of the highest density populations on planet Earth, right? Everybody's on top of each other. Um, Now, when Israel responds, Israel is very, very careful about how it responds. Now, what I mean by that is it's difficult to operate in an area like that because A, it's so densely populated, and B, what Hamas does, and again, I want to differentiate Hamas and the Palestinian Authority.
Mhm.
The Palestinian Authority runs, this is the party of Yasser Arafat, they run the West Bank, which has been relatively quiet for the last 20 years. There
Okay.
has been an arrangement, a peace arrangement, more or less, and there has not been a lot of activity between the Palestinians in the West Bank and Israel, as opposed to Hamas. And Hamas is a traditional terrorist organization.
Okay.
In the 90s, they were blowing up buses. They had a spate of buses where they blew up random buses, schools, and this is what led to the disengagement of Gaza.
Yeah.
And so when Israel responds, it's very careful as to how it responds, understanding that look, it's a large civilian population, but it's difficult because you're bombing from the air, right? And ultimately, what they do is a lot of different things, a lot of different tactics they have. They, for example, will call buildings. So Hamas, let me go back 1 second.
Okay.
Hamas tends to use its own people as human shields. In other words, Hamas puts its infrastructure in buildings, mosques, hospitals, schools, daring Israel to bomb that infrastructure, knowing that it will cause civilian casualties, and therefore it can claim a victimhood status. Say, look, you're bombing a school, a mosque. This is their modus operandi. I know it
Okay.
sounds crazy for somebody who doesn't really understand or is not involved in the Middle East, but this is a well-established pattern. And it puts us in a very difficult position because it has to respond and it has to attack Hamas infrastructure, but at the same time understands that by doing so, it's going to put civilians at risk. It's a very tough position militarily and morally to put the Israeli army in. But
Sure.
they've found a way to, for example, they may actually put in phone calls to these buildings, to the mosques, saying, look, there's Hamas infrastructure in your building. There's a bomb making facility. We're going to bomb it in an hour. Please evacuate.
Mm.
And for the most part, they do evacuate. They bomb, and civilians, look, war is a terrible thing. Civilians will always be killed. It's just the nature of war. But if you look at the data, so roughly, more or less, for every terrorist Israel kills, one civilian also dies. That sounds bad. Look, it's every life, every civilian life is important. A terrorist life to me is not not really important.
Yeah.
Every civilian life is important, and you want to protect them as much as possible. But if you look at NATO's numbers, and NATO is also relatively careful. They're also bombing when they were, for example, in the Afghanistan war, where there's no density really. It's a really open area. Oftentimes their numbers were one, military target to
Mhm.
3 to 5 civilians. That's just the nature. And that, by the way, that's a pretty good number relative to war we've seen in the past also. So for Israel to get that number down to 1 to 1 in an area so highly densely populated, when they're actually trying to Hamas is trying to gin up the own Palestinian civilian numbers, it's a
Mhm.
pretty good number. Okay. Yet, Israel's taken a lot of flack for killing any civilians. Fair enough. Fast forward now to what happened over the weekend. So Hamas, like I said before, they were generally relegated to just sending rockets over the border. Again, Hamas targets Israeli civilians. Israel is targeting Hamas terrorists themselves. So that distinction is important, and it'll come into play and by the stop me anytime if I'm going on too long.
No, please keep going.
Okay, so this past weekend we saw an escalation that we've never seen, not just in Israeli history. This is considered to be one of the darkest days in Jewish history in terms of the
Sure.
amount of civilians who were killed.
Yeah, I've heard it
Right now,
compared to Israel's 9/11.
yeah. So to give you the number, so about 1,200 Israeli civilians at this point, and we think the number is going to go up, have
Sure.
been killed thus far. Um, Relative to the American population, that's as if 60,000 Americans were killed over the course of 3 days.
Wow.
That's the numbers in terms of the effect of the population
Scale. Yeah.
scale. And we're not talking about, and by the way, if they were targeting military targets, I've got no issue with that. They're in a conflict. If they want to target military infrastructure in Israel, look, I wouldn't be happy about that, but that's a legitimate target for them to attack.
Mm-hmm.
They went after not only civilian targets. And I don't know if you saw the videos that are online.
Yeah,
It's
some of them.
difficult to even say what they did. They were targeting children.
Yeah, that's
Old people. I mean, there's now a story out where they were beheading infants.
yeah.
Okay, they went to an EDM concert. Ironically, a peace dance where they killed over 200 young people. They were raping women in front of their parents, and they were raping women and sending the videos to all they would use their social media account to show videos of them raping these people on their own Facebook accounts. The barbary was something we haven't seen since ISIS. It's ISIS type tactics.
Okay.
Horrific human toll that was taken. And that's kind of where we're at now. Now, Israel has now responded by bombing significant targets. This is the largest scale bombing we've seen in many years in Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a difficult moral position Israel's been in. They're doing their best to keep the civilian toll down. We don't know what the civilian terrorist ratio is going to be. We know that about 1,000 Palestinians have been killed so far. My guess is the numbers will be similar. Probably over half, if not more, will be terrorists versus civilians. But it's a very difficult position they've been put in. So that's the general primer on where we're at.